Hello, students. Um, Today I'm going to be discussing Anthony Downs' A Theory of Bureaucracy article. And this article is also a golden gem of an article. It was first published in 1965. It is possibly considered, again, one of the seminal articles in public administration. Quite honestly, it's one of the best articles to understand in a very succinct manner what public administration is and what bureaucracies are. Because I know we use the term bureaucracy and bureau all the time, but very often people forget what does it actually mean. Anthony Downs does a phenomenal job of explaining this as well as discussing the types of officials. There's 5 types of officials that he discusses in the article that should sound very familiar to all of you guys. So, one thing I should talk about is a little bit, I would like to discuss very briefly is a bureau, right? A bureau is a particular form of organization. And the first step is, of course, to define an organization, which Anthony Downs does on his very first page, on page 439. An organization is a system of consciously coordinated activities or forces or two or more persons, people, which has been explicitly created to achieve specific ends. So again, an organization is a system of consciously coordinated activities or forces of two or more people, which has been explicitly created to achieve specific ends. So it's a bureau if and only if it possesses the following four characteristics. It is large, it has to be very large and very big, and the highest ranking members no less than half of all the members personally. So the federal government is a great example about that, right? Federal government might be like, I don't know, 1.6 million, 2 million public servants, excluding the military. That's a huge, huge organization, right? There's no way that the upper people, President Trump and other people in the cabinet, there's no way they can possibly know everybody below. It's not possible to know that. A majority of its members in the public organization are full-time workers who depend upon their employment in the organization for most of their incomes. So they're full-time people, they're supposed to be full-time, and they depend upon their employment in the organization as most of their income or majority of their income, or possibly in many cases all of their income. The initial hiring of personnel, their promotion within the organization, and their retention therein are at least theoretically based upon some type of assessment of the way in which they have performed or can be expected to perform their organizational roles rather than upon either ascribed characteristics, such as, for example, religion, race, or social class, or periodic election by some outside constituency. And the last part, the fourth part, is the major portion of its output. The organization's output is not directly or indirectly evaluated in any manner by markets external to the organization by means of voluntary quid pro quo transactions. So people are not really, what's the word I'm looking for? They're not really evaluated, and they don't have like you give me this and I give you that and we exchange this. It doesn't seem to work that way in external markets. Now, of course, there's other parts that I can discuss and I would like to discuss with you because, as I mentioned, this is one of the golden articles in public administration. It's if you ever go to any cocktail party, which I'm sure some of you guys will be doing sometime down the road, you may be going to a presidential reception, or perhaps you may be visiting Austin or DC, and you can talk about Anthony Downs and public bureaucracy. This is one of the best ones to talk about that, to sound knowledgeable. And you can take all the credit, I don't mind. So there are types of officials that he mentions. This part is important because, as we'll see, they still exist even today. So there's 5 types of officials Anthony Downs discusses in his article. They're climbers, conservers, or conservatives, but go with conservers, so there's no confusion. Zealots, and there's advocates, and there's statesmen. So there's climbers, conservers, zealots, advocates, and statesmen. Climbers are those that seek seek status, power, and promotion. They're the climbers. They're the ones that they come into an organization and they're like, I got to climb the ladder as fast as I can. How can I get promoted? How can I get to the next level? How can I, and that's their motivation. That's their goal. And I'm going to give you guys these 5 different types of people because you're going to come across them in your organization. I know for sure at TSU we have people like this. I will not say who it is, of course, But I know some of you can probably guess who I might be, I suppose. Whether I'm a climber or a conserver or a zealot or an advocate or a statesman. Um, there might be extra credit for those who can figure it out. So climbers, of course, seek status, they seek power, they seek promotion. They're very, very aggressive in their career, and they move up the ladder as fast as they can, sometimes successfully, maybe sometimes not so successfully. Conservers are those who are very content to be seeking security and avoiding change. They don't like change. Most people don't like change, but they really don't like change. They like to kind of just stay in their little foxhole and they just kind of observe the world. Or you can think of them sort of like turtles. They put their head inside the shell and they just kind of look around and that's it. They don't poke their head out. Of course, there's no such thing as bureaucratic turtles, but that gives you an idea what conservers look like. Zealots. Zealots are those who are they're very narrow-minded. They have very narrow causes, and they are very, very aggressive about one narrow cause. And so they'll fight very hard. They'll put a lot of work and effort in for XYZ. And the article they discuss about the Air Force. I believe they discuss about the Air Force where they say, where's the one? Let me see if I can find it. They talk about an Air Force official who is very, very important. And excuse me, they're very gung-ho about a new type of submarine or a class destroyer that they want. And they really believe that's what they want. They have to have that. And if they don't have it, their job as a zealot is not really going to be there. Now, in fairness, of course, their job as a zealot is also dependent upon getting that, world-class destroyer or the next generation submarine, because of course that also pushes them to go ahead and get that destroyer, the submarine, because that increases their power. Of course, once you achieve your goal of getting that world-class submarine or the next generation destroyer, or vice versa, that gives you further confidence and power to go for the next level and ask for something else also, which is also very normal for public officials to do, and indeed probably most bureaucrats, right? They're going to try for something, and if they can get something, they're going to try again for something more. I think most people probably know that, or you guys, if you don't know that, then you definitely know now. Zealots, of course, they seek power for its own sake, and they can effectuate the sacred policies to which they are loyal. That's power for their own sake because it gets them to accomplish more. Advocates, I would like to talk a little bit about now. They promote. They're sort of like they're loyal to a broader set of their own policies or a broader organization. So, for example, naval warfare, which they give in the article. Someone could be a vice admiral or the secretary of the Navy, for example, or secretary of the Air Force. And so they have to just promote themselves. So, for example, I, as a college professor at TSU, I have to promote, of course, the mission statement of not just TSU, but I also have to promote TSU in general. And I obviously promote the mission statement, for example, the MPA program, or if we have a mission statement for the Department of Political Science and Administration. But I have to also promote the values and the mission statement for TSU, which, of course, any student can look up online and you can see what the mission statement is and whether or not it aligns with what I'm trying to promote as an advocate, the type of bureaucrat. But they're very impartial in judging the merits of various proposals within the organization to which they are loyal. But they are also very highly partisan. They can become very highly partisan in supporting that organization conflict with outsiders. So what that means is they're advocates, and they can be very vicious, and they can be very loyal, and they can be very aggressive with any perceptions of threats towards them. This is actually what oftentimes happens with many what's called like turf battles between different public bureaucracies. So, for example, the FBI could have a turf battle between the FBI and the CIA, or let's say the ATF, or perhaps DHS, between different agencies and different departments. That could happen over who has jurisdictional control over a crime scene, for example, or somebody who could be an international spy working in the United States and is married to a U.S. citizen. That could come under several different jurisdictional aspects, overlaps. The CIA, which obviously is a spy, the spy master of everything, right? And of course, the FBI, which has operational grounds and jurisdictional grounds and zealously guards its territory with the United States. They don't have it. The CIA has no national jurisdiction. They have to work with the partner agency, basically. So that can create a little bit of jealousies and rivalries. And the CIA director and the FBI director could kind of butt heads. They could, bump heads on this regarding, who has the advocacy for, who has a jurisdictional aspect on the crime scene, for example. So that happens very often. I know a lot of you guys like watching movies, and you see that very often in movies. Whereas, in the real world, of course, how often that happens, I mean, that's anybody's guess. I do recall when I was a student in D.C. at American University, one of my professors was a captain in the D.C. police force. And he brought in the FBI as guest speakers to our class one time. And the FBI, they were talking about some different things about the training ground and such. And for those of you who are interested, if you ever are interested, you go to D.C., the FBI allows tours of their facilities. You just have to make an appointment and you can go in, I think. But they allow that. And so they give you a little tour and everything. So we were talking about this. And of course, the FBI is the federal government. And the federal government is always, as we know from the Civil War, is a superior government over all the other states until, of course, probably very recently. So someone asked a professor who was a captain of the D.C. police force about what his impressions were about the FBI. And he said, I have a comment to make, and that's all the comment I make, which is the FBI has very nice facilities. And that's it. He didn't want to say anything else because, of course, there is sort of rivalry between the DC and the FBI over crime scenes and other jurisdictional aspects. DC is considered a federal territory, so it comes under the federal government, actually. So the DC police force is not going to really be the ones in charge many times at many different things going on in DC. It's the FBI or the Secret Service or other ATF alphabet agencies that go on. Last couple of things I would like to speak about. There's internal dynamics. And the thing that he talks about, which is why this article, even though it was published in 1965, even then it is still extremely relevant. I mean, it's about 50 years old, almost 60-year-old, this article. But there's internal dynamics and there's external dynamics, organizational behavior, which is very, very important to understand. The information, and some of you who work at the low level, you can obviously see this, and you probably know this. I know this as a lowly professor at TSU. Of course, I see this all the time. Information is often distorted as it goes up the chain, as it goes up the organizational chain of command. It leads to many misunderstandings and decision errors. So the way it works is information has to be kept very broad, and as it goes up, it has to be very narrow, and as it goes up, it becomes more broader. So it becomes more vaguer. The way that organizational leaders, as Anthony Downs mentions in this article, is the way they have to handle information overload, which even in 65, if you think about it, there wasn't even any internet back then. But even then they could understand that information is crucial, so crucial for public bureaucracies. So the idea would be that at the top, you have to send it down very narrow, and at the bottom, you should send it up very vague so that it becomes more narrow as it goes up. That's ideally how it should be. So the top-down orders should be very, very broad, and they interpreted very vaguely at the bottom. Hierarchies are unavoidable. There's always going to be hierarchies, as most students probably figured out by now. Most human beings, we like to be governed. We like someone to take charge and say, you know what, I'll make the decision on this. I will be your boss. I will work something out over here. That's generally how it works. We don't want to admit that probably because we like to all have egos and we like to all believe that we are in control of our destinies, which is probably not very true. The 99% of the time, I think we all know that. And if you get to a certain advanced age like myself, you definitely see that you control what you control. And actually, there's very little that you can control, actually, except yourself. Officials' self-interest in all the 5 ones that I described, zealots, the advocates, statesmen, etc. Officials' self-interest shapes how policies are communicated, interpreted, and enacted. That's why statesmen are probably the ones who are most important in terms of understanding about the public interest, because statesmen are generally the ones who look to the public interest and our broader national goals. In many cases, actually, presidents such as Joe Biden, Obama, President Trump, they are considered to be like the statesmen. Of course, people like Senator Marco Rubio, who is the current foreign secretary, Secretary of State, they're also considered to be the public interest and our broader national goals. Secretary Naomi for DHS, she would also be considered more of a statesman in terms of public interest and broad national goals. Official self-interest, of course, are how policy is communicated, interpreted, and enacted. So if you know people's personalities, and that's another big problem, unfortunately, that Anthony Downs discusses in this article, is that when you have people's personalities, they oftentimes can be kind of warped in terms of national or state policies. So how people look at Governor Abbott, President Trump, President Obama, Joe Biden, Michael Johnson in the Speaker of the Senate, as they look at them, they also perceive different personalities, and those personalities then shape political alignments and political decision making, which can be a good thing. It may also not be a great thing in many ways. So bureaus, of course, seek to protect and expand their territory, sometimes to the detriment of coordination with others. Large organizations naturally, of course, rely on rules and resistance to change, or maybe not change, which is inertia. It gets stuck, actually, which is what's called bureaucratic inertia, in part because radical changes then they threaten the security and convenience, which is what we're going through right now. A lot of upheaval in the United States right now. Populism, a lot of many changes that happen because of populist leaders that have been enacted, such as Zoran Mondani in New York City, such as President Trump in DC. These are populist leaders that have been enacted, that have been voted into office. It's very unusual how people think that, for example, people who voted for President Trump in 2024 also voted for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, even though Trump and AOC are on opposite sides of this political spectrum. But when people ask them, when researchers ask the same people who voted for these two individuals, who again are completely different, they're polar opposites actually on the political spectrum, people said, well, I like the way they talk, and they seem to be talking for me. And so because of that, I voted for them. I can identify with them. So it's oftentimes a very political and personal narrative that we go through. Loyalty within management, efforts to maintain goal homogeneity, meaning that we would like to have goals that align itself, and of course selective recruitment are used to reduce internal friction. After all, many times and many organizations, Houston Police might be a good example, Houston Fire Department would be another good example, people obviously hire other people who look and act and seem to be like them because they want people coming in that are going to reduce friction. Even in academia, we do the same thing very often. The problem, of course, is many students know this, you really can't tell much from 1 or 2 interviews or even 3 interviews about somebody. Job hunting and job interviews are very much like dating, actually, right? You go on a date, it's sort of like a first-time job interview. You don't really know how it's going to be. And if you get a call back the second time, you're like, okay, so I guess the date went pretty good. I agree and you agree, so we mutually agree to go on a second date. But that doesn't really prove that it's compatible for a long-term relationship. And that's the fallacy that many people fall into. And in many bureaucracies, that's the same fallacy that they fall into. That's why some organizations like Southwest Airlines, Four Seasons Hotels, those Zappos shoes, if you look at them, they try very hard to maintain homogeneity in terms of like similar people that they want to hire. And they go through several rounds of asking questions so that they can figure out that somebody is not just good on paper, but they're also good in person when they come into the job. Last couple of things I would want to speak about, of course, fast-growing bureaus. Fast-growing bureaus like, for example, DHS after 9/11, which was a new organization that was created in the aftermath of 9/11. They attract innovators and ambitious people, the climbers. But slow and stagnant ones, for example, a good example might be DOE, Department of Energy, possibly Department of, let me see, a good example, DOE, and State Department would be a good example also until recently. They're slow or stagnant. They're dominated by those who resist change. So if you want to make big changes right now in 2025, ICE is probably the one you should join as an agency, which comes under DHS. That's probably the one because they're the ones making the biggest moves, they're making the biggest changes. If you like something fast and moving quickly, that's the one you have to go to, obviously. State Department, probably not. Department of Energy, probably not either. But those are the ones you have to go to. Now, there's obviously bureaucratic turf wars, which I discussed. There's obviously agency rivalries that happen. Now, of course, you have to consider, the last thing to think about, which I like to leave students with questions about this. Does Downs' modern 20th century model still fit today's public sector? Particularly with the digitization, with artificial intelligence, which network organizations, flatter hierarchies, less people being hired, even including Doge coming in and changing and firing workers and such to kind of flatten and sort of level organizations. Does that still affect us even today? I would venture, and probably most students would venture, that yes, that's what happens. Some organizations are going to be changing all the time, and some are not going to be changing all the time. Some are going to be very interactive and aggressive, and some will, of course, maybe change down the road. But what you should understand from Downs' article is those 5 types of personalities that he identifies: the climbers, the zealots, the conservers, the advocates, and the statesmen. Those 5 types, they still exist. They still exist in any organization you look at, even at TSU. They still exist. And you will probably see them in your organization. In fact, probably I can guarantee some of you watching it right now can identify yourselves as one or more, because sometimes it can be a Venn diagram where they cross over. And so you can be a climber in some aspects, and you can be a conserver in some aspects. That's perfectly okay too. So I leave you with this. Think about it carefully next time when you look at an organization and observe who are the people that you think could be climbers, conservers, statesmen, zealots, and the conservers. Who are these individuals you can think about? Very likely you're probably thinking about one of them as yourself. Thank you again. I look forward to seeing you at the next video.